extremely alkaline. And you're going to say, well, why are my neighbor's dwarf Burefords looking beautiful and dark green and mine are yellow? Well, chances are the soil in your bed was pretty lousy to start out with. So that's another one of those things you really want to figure out before you start planting. And if in doubt, ask. You know, a good nurseryman can tell you which plants are more tolerant of a wide range of alkalinity and which ones aren't. And if you move from a different part of the country, forget about bringing plants with you. In some cases, you may be able to. But if you're from very far away from San Antonio, what you grew at home is not going to grow here without an awful lot of effort. Yes, ma'am?
The dwarf that you were just talking about, if it's already in the ground,
yep,
and you know that there's, it's probably too alkaline. Will the Super Thrive, will that help?
the Super Thrive will help the roots, but you want to do something to correct the alkalinity.
Okay.
Now, and we're going to cover a lot of different topics, so please forgive me if I jump from topic to topic, but I'm going to try to cram about 12 hours worth of information into probably a little over an hour this morning. For years, we told people plant with peat moss because peat moss makes the soil more acid. We found out since then that peat moss is one of the worst things that you can use as far as long-term plant health because peat moss is antimicrobial. Peat moss is probably one of the best preservatives in the world. I had the pleasure a few years ago of saving my money and going to Ireland. Saw a deer head, a red stag, that's been extinct for about 5,000 years. It was virtually perfectly preserved because it had fallen into a peat bog. Saw a chunk of butter that they estimated was 150 years old. The earlier peoples were very wise. If they lived in that kind of country and lived on the edge of a peat bog, if you wanted to preserve perishable things, you went and buried it in the peat. I mean, if you're a survivalist or whatever, and you think all the power is going to go out, and what are you going to do without having any refrigeration? Invest in peat moss. It's one of the best preservatives out there. But because it is antimicrobial, it's going to be very anti all those wonderful little microbes that we tell you make your plants healthier. The modern substitute is compost, well-rotted compost. And we're finding out that the pH of the soil is not nearly as critical as we once thought it was if we keep the healthy microbial population. Because we are never going to have acidic soils in this part of the world. And that's what people were trying to do when they planted in peat moss. Every few years they'd have to dig it out and replace it. But when you water, you're putting high pH alkaline water on the soils. As our water becomes scarcer, as our water tables drop, you want to talk about what they're calling DFCs, desired future conditions. Your current political leaders are already making plans for how much they figure they can allow the water tables to drop throughout this area. They're making plans for your water that you're not going to like, but they're certainly not going to tell you about that. Our water is only going to get worse in the future. But when you plant with compost, compost as it decomposes produces large amounts of what we call humic acids, which is pretty much all the acidifying that you are going to need. Now, don't expect to grow cranberries here. Don't expect to grow Venus flytraps here or something like that. Not going to happen. But you can grow a wide range of plants, and you can keep your plants to the degree of acidity that they need with good organic material. That means compost when you plant. That means good organic mulches on the surface of the soil. Because as they decay, they keep putting more and more of these very mild acids into the ground. And that's all your plants, like your dwarf Burford hollies and things like that. That's all they really need in this area, plus that healthy microbial population associated with the roots. Above all, never put chemical fertilizers on things, because of many things we've learned, chemical fertilizers destroy a lot of the beneficial mycorrhizal fungus and a lot of the other good healthy things that coat the roots. So we're going to stay away from that. We're going to stay away from most fungicides and such as that. So anyway, we're going to check size, we're going to check light requirements, we're going to check soil requirements of our plants. We're going to use a lot of diversity in the plants that we put into the landscape. And above all, we're going to choose plants that we like. Do not ever, a lot of people start wanting to design their own landscapes, get a little frustrated and decided to pay a, quote, professional to come in and draw them a design. And after it's all planted, they find out that they don't like the plants that this person put into their landscape. There is only one reason to put anything into your landscape, and that is that it pleases you. Don't worry about what the kids think, about what the parents think, about what the neighbors think. If you like it, and if it's not going to pose an invasive threat to your neighbors, if you like it, plant it. Don't plant spreading bamboo, whatever you do. You'll be driven out of the neighborhood. But, you know, don't plant anything you don't like. It's like growing a vegetable garden. I once was talking to somebody in one of our seminars here, and they were talking about how wonderfully their radishes were growing, and they'd planted 20 feet of rows of radishes. And I said, you know, well, you must really love radishes. And she said, no, I hate radishes, but they grow so easily. You know, don't plant something you don't like. There are plants that will, flowers that grow almost anywhere, but choose the things that you like and don't be governed by what somebody else tells you you should have in the area. Now, a few things about actually planting your plants. You think, you know, digging a hole is an easy thing. Well, there are two things that I will tell you about digging a hole for any plant. Never dig the hole deeper than the container that the plant is growing in. And the reason for that is very simple. A plant has a totally different structure to its stem above and below ground level. It's not true of tomato plants, but it's true of everything that you put into your landscape. And think of the stem up as being composed of material that cannot stay too wet. From the stem down, think of it as having its own layer of waterproofing, if you will. And the last thing that you want is to ever have soil piled up around the trunk of a plant. That will reduce a plant's health. Ultimately, that will kill a plant. You pile 3 inches of soil around the trunk of an oak tree, and sooner or later, it will kill the tree. If you dig the hole deeper than the root ball of your plant, no matter what you do, the soil underneath the plant is going to compact over time, and the plant's going to sink. And long term, that means things are going to fill in around the trunk of the plant, and you're going to have problems. So never dig the hole deeper than the plant you are putting into it. In the case of bedding plants that are only going to last for 6 months, perennials that are going to last for 2 or 3 or 5 years, that's not as critical. But trees and shrubs, the backbone of your landscape, always dig the hole the depth of the container. Dig it as wide as you like. Improve the soil as much as you want for this, you know, for the roots to grow into, but no deeper. When you dig a hole, dig a square hole or an angular hole, let's say. I know it's a lot of fun to create a perfectly little round hole when you dig. Sounds great. Bad idea for your plants though, because what happens? The soil out here is fairly compacted and may or may not be very good quality. You created this perfect little round hole. You put a lot of nice soil in there, and the roots of your plants are very content and happy in living in that little cell of good soil. And so what do? They grow round and round and round and round. Needless to say, that plant doesn't have a very expansive root system. It's going to be very susceptible to drought damage. In the case of a tree may very well strangle itself. And I'm going to show you what to look for when you buy a tree in the future too. But just keep in mind, you've got a trunk of a tree growing here, and you've got roots growing around like this. Now the trunk's going to grow bigger this way, the roots are going to grow bigger this way, and what would happen if you had the trunk of a tree here and a root circling around a foot away? Eventually, you strangle the trunk of the tree, and probably will kill the tree. It happens all the time. We'll talk about how to prevent that. So dig a square hole. When a root gets to a corner of the hole, what does it do? It takes off into the surrounding soil. It doesn't just continue in this ever-circling surrounding fashion. So digging a hole properly is very important. Everybody wants to improve the soil a great deal. Everybody wants to use compost. And compost is a wonderful thing. I think this Ladybug Revitalizer compost is the best compost in a bag we have ever found. If you're going to buy bulk compost, I think the compost that New Earth makes here is the best going. You can buy it from different people. You can buy it from Stone and Soil Depot. There are a number of different people selling New Earth compost, but I think it's the best in the business. Should you put a bunch of it in the bottom of the hole? No. Should you put it down on your ground before you plant grass? No. That's the other very important thing to remember about a plant. A plant is a totally different creature from the soil down, from the soil up. Top of a plant takes in carbon dioxide and gives off oxygen. That's what keeps us alive here on this earth. The bottom, the root system of a plant is just the opposite. It has no green leaves to carry out photosynthesis. The root system of a plant takes in oxygen and gives off carbon dioxide. Compost, as it continues its decomposition, produces a lot of carbon dioxide. That's why putting compost on your yard greatly cuts down on water usage. Openings on a plant's leaf that open up early in the morning take in their daily supply of carbon dioxide, and while they're doing that, they're releasing a lot of